shepherd's craft. The mist clung to the rolling hills of Aveyron like a mourner's shroud. Our rented Citroën crawled along the narrow country road as darkness fell, the headlights barely penetrating the thickening fog. James clutched the steering wheel, his knuckles white, while I squinted at the hand-drawn map the innkeeper had given us in broken English. "Are you certain this is the right way, Charlotte?" James's voice held that edge of frustration I'd grown accustomed to over our 3 years together. The weekend getaway to the French countryside was supposed to mend what London had broken between us. The innkeeper said the cottage would be just past the old stone bridge. We should have crossed it by now. I folded the map and pressed my forehead against the cool window glass. The pastoral landscape that had seemed so charming in daylight now loomed with sinister shadows. The car jolted suddenly, and a harsh grinding sound erupted from beneath us. James cursed, steering onto what passed for a shoulder on the narrow road. Rain began to patter against the windshield as he killed the engine. "Flat tire," he muttered, reaching for his phone. "No service, of course." Through the mist, I noticed a faint golden glow perhaps half a kilometer ahead. "Look, there must be a house. We can ask for help." The rain intensified as we trudged along the muddy road. James carried our overnight bag, having decided we shouldn't leave valuables in the abandoned car. As we drew closer, I could make out a stone cottage with a thatched roof. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. James knocked on the weathered door. It creaked open to reveal a gaunt man with a deeply lined face, perhaps 60 years old. He wore a heavy wool sweater that smelled strongly of lanolin and animals. "Bonsoir," he said, his pale eyes taking in our bedraggled state. When James explained our predicament in his university French, the man's face softened with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Entrez, entrez," he gestured for us to enter. "Je m'appelle Antoine." The interior of the cottage was austere but tidy. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and everywhere hung the tools of a shepherd's trade: crooks, shears, and most prominently, tanned sheepskins in various states of preparation. Antoine explained that he was a shepherd who supplemented his income by creating artisanal sheepskin products. "My family has raised sheep in these hills for 7 generations, he told us as he ladled a thick stew into earthenware bowls. "The meat was gamey and rich. The old ways are dying, but I preserve what I can." He offered us wine, dark and homemade, which warmed my insides but made my head swim strangely. As Antoine spoke of his craft, I noticed James growing drowsy beside me. My own limbs felt leaden, and the room seemed to pulse at the edges of my vision. "You are tired from your journey," Antoine said, his voice somehow both distant and too close. "I will show you where you can rest." He led us to a small bedroom with a single oil lamp casting long shadows across a large bed covered in sheepskins. My steps faltered, and James nearly collapsed onto the bed. As sleep overtook us, I thought I heard Antoine whispering, but the words were lost to darkness. I awoke to James's muffled screams. The room was dimly lit by a single candle. James lay naked on a wooden table that hadn't been there before, his wrists and ankles bound with rough rope. Antoine stood over him, methodically making incisions along James's arms with a gleaming blade. A bucket beneath the table collected the blood dripping from the wounds. "The sheepskins reject human flesh," Antoine was muttering. "They always reject it. But the ancient texts speak of a human who becomes the sheep through ritual transformation." Horror paralyzed me as I realized I was similarly bound to a chair, my clothes removed, a sheepskin draped over my shoulders. The drugged wine still clouded my thoughts, but adrenaline was quickly burning through the fog. Antoine continued his grotesque work, seemingly oblivious to my consciousness. "For generations, my family has tried to recreate the perfect binding, human and sheep as one entity. The ultimate artisanal creation. But something is always missing." He turned to a workbench where various tools lay arranged with meticulous precision. I saw curved needles, thick thread, and several jars containing substances I couldn't identify. The binding requires absolute freshness, he explained conversationally to James, who had fallen into shock. The skin must be prepared while the spirit still clings to the flesh. Then, and only then, can the transformation succeed. I tested my bonds while Antoine's back was turned. The rope around my right wrist had some give, the knot slightly looser than the others. As the shepherd selected his implements, I worked my hand methodically, feeling skin tear as I forced it through the binding. Antoine returned to James with a jar of dark paste. This salve contains herbs gathered under a waning moon, mixed with the marrow of lambs and the blood of previous failures. It prepares the skin to accept its new covering. He began applying the foul-smelling mixture to James's chest, working it into the cuts he had made. James's eyes were open but vacant, his breathing shallow and irregular. "Why?" I managed to croak, partly to distract Antoine, partly because I needed to understand this madness. Antoine paused, turning to me with an expression of genuine surprise, as if he'd forgotten I could speak. "The ancient magic requires symmetry, a man and a woman, like the first shepherds who made covenant with the beasts. When the ritual is complete, you will become living vessels of the old powers. Neither human nor animal, but something transcendent." His eyes gleamed with religious fervor. "My grandfather succeeded once, but the woman escaped before the final binding. Since then, every attempt has failed." He stroked my hair almost tenderly. "But your skin is perfect. The wool will bond with you." As Antoine turned back to James, I felt my right hand finally slip free. Moving slowly to avoid detection, I reached for a pair of wool shears that hung on the wall behind me. What happened next remains a blur in my memory. Antoine began to sew a prepared sheepskin directly onto James's flayed chest. James's screams rose in pitch, then stopped altogether. I remember the weight of the shears in my hand, the resistance as they pierced Antoine's neck, the fountain of blood that splashed warm across my face. I remember sawing through my remaining bonds with the bloody shears, my hands slippery and clumsy. I remember cradling James's head, knowing already he was gone, his eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. I remember finding our clothes, our phones, our car keys. I remember the cottage erupting in flames behind me, the oil lamp knocked over in the struggle, or perhaps deliberately overturned by my hand. I cannot say with certainty. The authorities found me walking along the road at dawn, clothes soaked with blood not entirely my own. They told me later that nothing remained of Antoine's cottage but charred stone and ash. They found evidence of previous victims buried in the sheep pasture, couples who had disappeared over the years while traveling through the region. The official record states that I defended myself against a deranged killer, that I survived by extraordinary means, that I am a victim. 3 months have passed. I sit alone in a tavern in a different part of France, far from Aveyron but still in the countryside. Before me steams a shepherd's pie, flaky crust over minced lamb and vegetables. I take a bite and savor the rich, gamey flavor. Sometimes at night, I feel the phantom weight of wool against my skin. Sometimes I wake believing I can hear sheep bleating in the distance, even in central London where I now reside. Sometimes I wonder if Antoine succeeded after all, in some way I've yet to understand. I wonder what James would think of me now. I wonder if my ex-boyfriend in London ever thinks of me, if he's seen the news stories, if he understands how fortunate he was that we broke up before our planned holiday to France. I finish my shepherd's pie, leaving nothing on the plate. The waiter comments on my appetite, and I smile, telling him I've developed a taste for lamb. Tomorrow I'll visit another village, another pastoral landscape. I've grown fond of the countryside, of the isolation, of the sheep that dot the hillsides like clouds come down to earth. And sometimes, in the right light,